Greetings, friends. This is Chris Batts, your host of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. We are certainly living in interesting times. COVID-19 has touched everyone in some way. Many are grieving the loss of a loved one. Many others are using this time to reconnect with family and those around them. I know I speak for everyone to say we are eternally grateful for the essential businesses and workers who put their lives on the lines every day. Thank you for being our heroes in this most important time. Thank you. In regards to today, these next two episodes will be a two-part series with the General Counsel of a global U.S. beverage company. Today's episode will be focused on COVID-19 and many topics surrounding this Fortune 500's journey in the midst of a global pandemic. The second episode, we discussed my guest's global M&A career, his leadership style, his passion for doing things better, going in-house advice, and much more. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast. And please also leave a review on iTunes. As many of you know, we interview corporate defense, law firm leaders, partners, general counsel, and legal consultants. You are listening to episode 40 of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast.
Broadcasting from Kansas City, this is the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. In each episode, you'll receive actionable ideas and hear personal leadership stories of both men and women serving as leaders and executives in the legal industry. Enjoy a front row seat as Chris Batts speaks with general counsel, legal consultants, and law firm leaders and law partners at the top corporate defense law firms from around the United States.
Welcome to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Batts with the Lion Group. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Craig Katerberg, General Counsel of Anheuser Busch of St. Louis. Since joining AB InBev in 2012, Craig has held positions based in North America, China, Europe, and Australia. He has worked on negotiating and integrating some of the largest global M&A transactions in the beverage sector, including in Australia, Canada, China, India, Korea, the U.S., and other countries. Before joining AB InBev, Craig worked at major law firms in the U.S. and Latin America, as well as working in the public sector in New York City. Craig holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Chicago and a law degree from Northwestern University. Welcome, Craig, to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
Craig, we actually had recorded the first episode and right as all of COVID kind of breaking out or actually just in the beginning stages of it. So I really appreciated your suggestion for us to come back and record a second episode. And so this episode, we're going to be touching on insights from you and frankly, your experience going through this public health crisis of COVID-19 as the General Counsel of Anheuser Busch. Can you just share with me your firsthand experience of how quickly the world has changed?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And first, I should just say, I really hope all of the listeners that you have are doing well in this time. We're focused a lot on this topic, as I think the entire world is really at this time. So I'm happy to be here and happy to be able to talk a little bit and share.
Yeah.
So I do think it's one of those. The first point I would just mention is I don't think we're necessarily through the crisis.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we have quite a long way to go. But you are starting to see a lot of changes.
Yeah.
And so I think it's one of those that just being flexible is one of those that you certainly need to be in that crisis situation, and one that we're striving to go. These things are changing day to day rather than even a quarter or yearly basis. Staying flexible is the biggest one. And certainly we're thinking about that, where our top priorities are always our people and the health and safety of our people.
So when did things get real for your world? I know that when you and I had our initial recording for the second episode we're going to release, you had already began explaining to me that you have facilities in China, I believe it was Wuhan, that quickly became a worldwide issue. Talk to me about how this evolved for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And for someone, I think that's where it can often be an advantage to be able to see a little bit into what is coming on that side, because we do have a brewery in Wuhan. We have about 40 breweries in China, and understanding a little bit about how it is that people in China and the company in China are working through it is helpful to be able to identify how it is that we're dealing with things in the United States. So it was really more February, March when it had ramped up in the United States, and people were looking at it as far as preparing and protecting for what we understood to be the oncoming health crisis. But it is one where I know China had been dealing with it for several months. And so we had some very good insights and learnings about how to prepare for the oncoming health crisis. Of course, no one knows even today where things are going, or certainly we didn't know at that time, even if the virus would come to the United States. But just understanding a little bit about how other people have dealt with situations and stressful situations can be very helpful in terms of mapping out your priorities and where you focus your attention, and make sure that you're as prepared as you can be in a lot of instances.
Hi, listeners. This is Chris Batts, legal recruiter and owner of the Lion Group. My team and I place legal and compliance talent around the United States and are known for our level of communication, speed, and strong track record. If you're an employer hiring your first attorney or first general counsel, or adding talent to your corporate legal department or compliance team, we should talk. Also, if you're a corporate defense law partner or group wondering about your options for a lateral move, we should also talk. Every aspect of our process is confidential, fast, and thorough. Contact us by going to our website, findthelions.com, or you can text the word headhunter to the number 44222, and then complete the web form and we'll follow up with you shortly. Now back to the show. When did things get serious for you and, say, the CEO, the CFO, the executive leadership team in St. Louis?
Yeah, on our side, it was even when we were hearing reports coming out of China. So we were taking it quite seriously. And so we established a crisis committee fairly early. And that crisis committee really focused that we were ready for what we saw may be coming. And eventually part of that did come. Of course, you plan for lots of scenarios that never materialized. With COVID-19, those did materialize. And so that was when we were seeing even infections in China, but then later, as you saw in Italy, some of those situations. So it was before we actually saw infections that was serious for us. But obviously, as soon as you have your first infection or first potential infection and then positive cases, it gets very, very serious because, of course, these are your colleagues that you're dealing with, and we want to make sure everyone is okay and going through that situation. So you plan as much as you can, but of course you can't control all factors that are out there.
And you brought it up before, but how did priorities begin to change, and how were you kind of reprioritizing your life as an executive and over the legal team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those where in normal years, if such a normal year ever exists, right? You have your 3-year plan, you have your 1-year plan, you're looking at the different quarters, and you're looking at, okay, this week or this month, what are the top priorities to be able to deliver the business results at the end of the year? I think 2020 is one of those where you've seen many public companies retract their guidance, and most of the companies are much more focused about their employees and what's going to be happening in the market, less focused on what are the quarterly results or the yearly results that are coming. Those things, of course, matter. They're certainly a secondary priority to the health and safety of your colleagues and your employees and the larger societal impacts. So one of the things, we even a few months ago, we never would have thought we would be making hand sanitizer at Anheuser Busch. And yet now that's one of the products that we have innovated and come out with because we saw that there was a need for that, and people have responded very well. It's one of them. We donated it, and we donated it with a partnership that we have with the American Red Cross. But that was something that was totally unexpected. And even a couple of months ago, we weren't talking about that. We were talking much more about getting ready for the oncoming COVID-19 and about, beer sales at bars and restaurants that were all open. And that seems very funny to be talking about now where, most of the bars in the United States are closed at this point. Most of the restaurants in the United States are closed.
Talk to me about the world of Anheuser with distribution and just the entire value chain. I'm trying to think of the right word, but when everything froze, how were you as the manufacturer of beer and several other products relating with and communicating with your buyers, in essence, the vendors?
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, it's a great one, right? Because we always try to over communicate in a lot of ways to make sure that our priorities are very clear, both for our employees, but also for the wholesalers that we work with, customers, and even consumers in a lot of cases. So some of the advertisements that we've done are not really even advertisements. It's about, one team and pulling together about lots of different sports teams, but about how it is that as a society, we're really working together to get through this COVID-19 crisis. And so that's much more the communication that we would have with consumers, but we always just would stress with our wholesalers and others, look, we've got, 3 priorities. It's health and safety of our employees. It is, helping protect our communities and serving the communities, because we, of course, live in St. Louis and New York and Michigan and every single state that we have in the United States. And, we have people living and working in all these communities. And, many millions of people are very negatively impacted by this and are going through very different situations. So we always make sure that we prioritize, people and communities and business continuity. Those are our 3 priorities, and we were very clear from the beginning, and that's continued to be the case as it's developed throughout this crisis.
Talk to me about just handling stress. When did stress become real for you in this situation, or did it ever? Is it kind of just a speed bump for you?
Stress is, everyone, but many people are dealing with on a very daily basis, right? So a crisis like this one, I think it's very acute for a lot of different people who are there. But one of the things to remember, of course, is just in a lot of cases how fortunate certain people are, right? I mean, if you're safe and you're with your family and you're able to work from home, you're in quite a privileged position, because a lot of people are in hospitals and are dealing on the front lines. And I'll talk about hero pay and the heroes who are out there. And frankly, everyone who is out and who is, very personally impacted is dealing with far more stress than what even people who are working through crisis committees or making strategic decisions or any of those. It's a different level of stress, I think. And so when you are dealing with, personal impacts, your world very much focuses to those areas, as it should for those people who are very in need at that time. And you see it personally, for myself and for others I know who've had COVID-19, but you also do see it really across the board. And I think everybody who is dealing with different types of stress at this point.
Yeah.
So in a leadership position, one of the things that you try to do is to provide that direction and that sense of safety as you're working towards being through a particularly stressful time, while trying to recognize that everybody is dealing with their individual stresses that might be visible or might not be in those situations.
For you, Craig, was your team personally impacted by this?
Yes, we have been, and I think that is true of many people in the United States.
Sure.
So it's one of those that we would, you want to support however you can with those particular team members, or if that's, external layers to work with. So it's different for people, but you do want to try to support as much as you can in those situations. So yes, we absolutely.
Yeah. Historically speaking, I'm curious, have folks kind of as historians at Anheuser Busch ever described something similar to this? I mean, was it World War II, World War I, other crises that have hit the country and affected Anheuser Busch?
It's a great question, because we do have a head archivist at Anheuser Busch who's over in St. Louis, and the tours that she provides are fascinating. So I'd really encourage anybody who's in the St. Louis area to go through and see the museum that we have at the brewery. I do think this is probably a different type of crisis, and every crisis is a little bit unique, but certainly there have been difficult times for Anheuser Busch as a company. I think this one it's too early to tell, frankly, just because we're in the middle of it. But yes, there have been, hard times also in the United States. It's obviously very different from a public health crisis that's going on, but, world wars as well. And there have been, Anheuser Busch has been around for 160 years. So we were around before the Spanish flu and after the Spanish flu. And we are certainly planning very hard to be around for another 160 or more years into the future. So I think, yes, we probably have faced somewhat similar situations in the past, but every crisis is unique. And frankly, when you're in the middle of it, you don't know how it's going to end. And that's part of the stressful situation.
Knowing you guys have operations all over the world, has your facilities gone back to work? Are they back and operational in China and other very infected areas like Korea?
Yeah, and Chris, it's a good question because one of the things that I do a lot is general counsel. I talk to other general counsels and find out how different operations are handling things, principally in the U.S., but again, also in other countries. So we found, in the United States, remotely, essential workers are working, and there's a little bit of a reopening of the economy that we're starting to see here in May. But in other countries, I think it's really been driven by the public health data and how comfortable people are. So one of the places I'd worked in the past was in Hong Kong, which has been really pretty open. So bars and restaurants are open, but that can change, and I think it has changed at different places. So yes, certain countries like Korea have been open and successfully open. Other places have opened and closed down. So it really depends on the circumstances of the country.
Craig, what advice would you give general counsel right now in the thick of this as they're trying to anticipate taking care of the core client, their team, and just anticipating what's coming?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, putting people first is essential. Like that has to be the priority that's there, particularly in a situation that's a public health crisis. And it's one of those where there are those impacts that are obvious, some are not. And so it's trying to make sure that you're able to still motivate the team to have what is required completed. But really the focus is about trying to streamline down the priorities so that everybody is really clear about, all right, if there's a trade-off from one to another, how will you make that decision? So decisions can be made, very quickly by the team who's there. And so it's really putting people first. It's over-communicating, I would say, is another really important aspect with direct reports, but with the broader team, and making sure that people know what the priorities are for you as a company, but also for you as an individual. And those two obviously overlap, but there's a certain amount of tone that comes around from the individual as well as, what are the company objectives. And fortunately, I'm proud to work at a company that puts people first. So that makes things much easier, I would say.
Craig, what's been the greatest challenge for you in the middle of this crisis with your role?
So greatest challenge in a lot of ways, I think, is dealing with so much uncertainty and so many unknowns. And I mean that about individual people and what's going on in their circumstance, but even in the larger sector. Right at the beginning, it looked like maybe there were a few cases in New York, and that was the situation. Same in San Francisco. But then in the course of a couple of weeks, you were seeing stay-at-home orders across the entire United States. 49 states had implemented them at that point. And it wasn't clear at that point if, what stores would be open, what stores would not be open. So dealing with a lot of that uncertainty, I think, is one of those about how is it that you try to make decisions where so much is unknown. And of course, when you have uncertainty on top of uncertainty, it's not sort of additive, it's multiplied. And so it's really making sure that you have the right priorities and are charting those and then staying true to those and to those priorities. And so by having frequent touch points and frequent communication, I certainly think that helps the organization move in a direction that is consistent and that is the broader benefit of what people need, what society needs, and what the communities in which we operate need.
Hi friends, this is Chris Batts. Over the next month or two, we're going to do a listener show. I'll consider doing these shows every 3 to 6 months, depending on your participation, the number and kind of questions you submit. Please please submit your questions and I'll spend some time reading through them and commenting. I have 2 easy ways for you to submit your questions. Number 1, you'll receive a link when you text the phrase LFL podcast to the number 44222. That's LFL PODCAST, or by clicking the Give Feedback link in the show notes on your device. Please take a moment and do this now. I look forward to your questions. Thank you, everyone. And now back to the show. There's this overused term right now called the new normal, and I hear more people not like even wanting to use the phrase, but what is normal going to look like, do you think, for lawyers, legal departments, law firms, corporations right now? What would you say?
I think it is too early to tell on many of those, is the short answer, because I think even listening to our conversation a month from now or a few months from now, there will be so many things I think that will just seem antiquated or like from a bygone era, which is an odd thing to say in present time, but we could certainly think that of even a couple of months ago as well. So that's the first thing that I would note on that one. I think we try to think about what a new norm is, or just some of what we learned. One of them is that people can be incredibly effective even when not in one place together. And I think we've seen that with technology in particular, that, Zoom in particular seems to be one of these programs most people are using. There's many different ones out there, but there's a lot of experimentation out of necessity that is the kind of thing that you wouldn't necessarily have a lot of those early adopters or people using technology in quite the same ways. So I do think there will be an impact at the coming out of this, or at the end of the day, and whatever the new normal ends up being. I also think it's one of those where, human contact and human interaction and social interaction is one that you see that people are really missing and craving. And so that human-centric nature is one that I think we will see a resurgence there as well, because it is a bit of an experiment, a forced experiment of having people, being in isolation, but also reinforcing that humans are social creatures. And so, bringing people together is one of those that is at the core of our mission as a beer company. But I think is also one that's kind of an inherent human need. And so I think we will see a lot of people very excited to reconnect with friends and colleagues and neighbors and others that might not have had that enthusiasm a few months ago.
Did you send your folks home? I assume that they've all been working home. Has that worked for you? And when do you plan on bringing them back to the office?
So we have a large percentage of our population that is essential. And I mean, we're a brewer. So brewing beer is one of those that you can't really do remote. You need to be on site for those. And similarly, there's a number of workers who are in those positions to be able to bring beer to people's doors, to bring water to people's doors, bring hand sanitizer with the Red Cross. So there are a lot of people who have continued to operate, obviously with the PPE and face masks and all of the others that we've provided. And we've been watching very carefully the government and the health authorities when it comes to what's required or requested in those situations. A very large percentage of the workforce as well that's working remotely and is continuing to work remotely. So we know for that percentage of the population that at least through the end of this month of May, we will be working remotely, and then we'll have to decide as we go forward, what that looks like. But I think there certainly will be changes just about, how close people sit together, or what are the entrances into the building, what are they like? Do you do temperature screenings to make sure that people are fine or that they aren't running a fever? So there's a lot of that nuance that's very much, been implemented and would be implemented also if we were to end the work from home policy.
Craig, on a lighter note, knowing that this whole thing has been tragic and difficult and stressful and very personal for everyone. For you, has there been any silver lining in all of this the past 8 weeks or 10 weeks?
Yeah, I think that's the right context to put it in, because I think there is, so many negative impacts that are out there that it's often those are the ones that you focus on, in many cases rightly so. When I think about silver lining, one of the things that I'm always pleased about is when you're on a Zoom, and I think many of us are on Zooms many hours a day. One of your kids or someone else's kids pops in, and you just feel the mood change a little bit. And there's certainly much more of kind of that, not even tolerance, like it would almost be like it's a negative thing, but appreciation that people are working really hard, but that there are people at the end of the day, and their mothers and their fathers and, daughters and sons and siblings and all the rest of it. And so there's not quite the same divide as if you're working next to somebody in an office and maybe you chat a little bit or you have a photo of somebody on a mug. It's different when, you can see a 3-year-old, if you mentioned about, a 3-year-old's birthday, for example, and what that looks like and how that's going to impact.
Yeah. With crisis, I think it's Rahm Emanuel who's been quoted quite a bit about never letting a crisis go to waste. The notion of leadership, whether there's people stepping up or the vacuum of leadership that's there. Craig, talk to me about leadership. Where have you seen great leadership so far in this? Who do you look to for leadership? Where have you learned your instincts in leadership? I know that's several questions, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, no, let me jump in on that one. So I think, within crises, it's one where there's no one person who is saying, okay, yes, this is the person that we will all look to about where it goes. I think within Anheuser Busch, our CEO of North America is someone who has a lot of expertise. This is Michelle Zuccaris, and really is very strong in terms of setting out strategic priorities and making sure that we have clear guidance that comes through as far as our compliance committee. I've seen that within our management committee, which is the crisis team meeting every single day. And you see that everyone really steps up. And in most situations, what you see is that people are thinking about their function or about their team or about their goals or objectives and whatever that is. In a crisis situation, I'm fortunate to be part of a management team that really banded together and said, okay, what is it that we as a company, but even more, what can we do to help the communities where we're operating in? Because that's what's needed the most in this situation. And we, of course, want to make sure that we can continue to provide all the services that we normally do, but it's ultimately about the people and the communities as well as our business that we're focused on. So that's been really amazing to see in terms of our own business here at Anheuser Busch. But I think, you see leadership in many places where you have neighbors who are helping each other out, very much about those who know each other personally. You see certain leaders who are communicating every single day so that people know what is being done and what the top priorities are. And you see that the leadership can really come from many places. And that's what's impressed me in many ways. It's not necessarily that it comes from a single centralized source or even a position of authority, although it of course can, but it comes from people really stepping up to try to help others wherever they may be in whatever way.
Craig, any final thoughts for my listeners as we are in the thick of it with COVID-19?
No, I just wish, you and your family, be safe and together. I think it's one of those, especially for people who end up traveling quite a lot, that it's not to be underestimated, the benefits that can be from being together. And I'm sure, there's lots of things about spouses and kids and parents and others that are very frustrating, but at the same time, there are lots of things that are really wonderful, and being able to try to appreciate a lot of those, even while it's very stressful. And during this time is one of the things. So I just wish everybody to be safe and to be together and appreciate whenever you can find those moments during the time, which I know are often difficult.
Craig, again, thank you. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thanks for your time today.
No, thanks a lot, Chris. It's great to speak with you. And I hope you stay well.
Thank you, everyone who listened to this episode of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. If you haven't already, please take a moment and subscribe. Also, we would love your feedback. You can leave feedback in 3 easy ways. You can go to the blog post on our website. You can click Give Feedback link in the show notes on your device. And then thirdly, you can text the phrase LFL podcast to the number 44222. That's LFL PODCAST. And thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. This podcast is for education purposes only. This content cannot be used for commercial use without written permission from the Lion Group. If you like this podcast, leave a review on iTunes.